Well, guys, we are only 10 days into Donald Trump's second term in office, and he has already been confronted with the first big national panic disaster scenario that he, as president, commander-in-chief of the United States, not only has to respond to, working with his administration to investigate, figure out what's going on, and hopefully prevent disasters like this from happening in the future. And there is a massive investigation that I believe it's the, correct me if I'm wrong, is it the FAA, Federal Flight Administration? It's a name like, I think it's the FAA, right? Or the FAA, not FFA? FAA, yeah. The FAA, I believe, will do like a big investigation into what caused this. Like massively. Like, they will find out what caused this to happen, and they will ensure that that is accounted for in the future. But the big problem with that is assuming our government is working as normal. For all we know, half or more of the employees of the FAA have had their pay frozen and have not been, allowed to come into work. This seems to be a real problem that a lot of FAA is Future Farmers of America, by the way. It might also, or FFA is Future Farmers of America. That might have been what I was mixing up. My bad. Anyway, they would normally do an investigation, find out what caused this, and they would likely pass regulations that would account for trying to prevent this kind of thing again in the future. If it was a fuck up with some sort of hardware or software on board the plane itself, or on the ground, that will be found out, and then that will be changed, and laws will be written that mandate severe punishments for airline designers that do not meet these standards. There's a whole process here. I've actually, I'm not super knowledgeable about it, but this is just one of those random little things that I happen to know a thing or two about, because I happen to watch a few videos by pilots describing the process for after a plane crash. I just happen to know this shit. So with that in mind, knowing that Trump is in charge of all these federal employees, their pay, their firing, their hiring, we know that there's a big hiring freeze right now, things are looking pretty scary, particularly in the way of, there's a lot of federal employees that make our lives fundamentally work, that make the things that we rely on a daily basis work. So with Trump cracking down so hard on federal spending, federal employees, trying to downsize everything, could this be an effect of that? The crash itself? Could an effect of it be that we don't really have a full investigation of this crash and we don't prevent things like this in the future? All of those questions were hanging over yesterday quite substantially, and we didn't have a lot of answers. But now, Donald Trump, like I said, as commander-in-chief, has been put on the spot. He has to respond to this. He has to assure the people that he and his administration know what they're doing and that they have everything under control. So let's watch him do that, because it's not good. It's very not good. Donald Trump did exactly what I predicted he would do. By the time this goes out, I should have gotten the video about the crash itself when the news was fresh out already. But if not, then you can go back to the VOD and you can watch. But people have already pointed out, I predicted to a T last night that Donald Trump's response would lean heavily on blaming DEI. I called it. I knew they were going to blame DEI. But of course, he also blames Biden, the guy who's not been president for 10 days. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what dumb shit Trump has to say about this disaster, which, by the way, he is trying to turn it into some kind of political chip against Biden and against DEI or whatever, which it doesn't exist anymore. I thought like I said last night, they were celebrating for as long as it was politically expedient to celebrate that DEI was dead. They destroyed DEI. DEI is over. But now that something big has happened that everyone's paying attention to, it has to be turned into something that benefits them because everyone's paying attention to this story. So now the story is going to be that a DEI pilot caused this crash.
And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed
He was, I hate Trump acts like a bully, Biff from Back to the Future. Biff from Back to the Future was literally based on Donald Trump, right? Like, like it's really on the nose too, especially when you consider like what 80s Donald Trump was like and what Biff is like. Wait, actually, yeah. Yes. Back to the Future 2 Biff is based off of Trump. He's the big rich guy, real estate guy with Trump's hair who's using Trump's mannerisms, talking like Trump. You guys realize that Trump was like the New York rich real estate guy for decades. His nickname was the Don in the 90s. Donald Trump has been immensely famous for longer than most of you in my chat have been born. Since before most of you in my chat have been born. Certainly since before I was born, Donald Trump has been famous. People have had his face on posters on their walls with his quotes because they worshipped his business advice. Like, yeah. Like Biff is literally inspired by Trump. Oh my God, Zan's right. Yeah. This shit's real.
Change them back to lower than ever before. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level. Their policy was horrible, and their politics was even worse. So as you know, last week, long before the crash, I signed an executive order restoring our higher standards for air traffic controllers and other.
What is up with his spray tan? He went to the guy who applies it on him every day, and he said, "Lay it on heavy, Doc." If anyone gets the joke I just made, then you deserve a medal.
There are important jobs throughout the country. So it was very interesting. About a week ago, almost upon entering office, I signed something last week that was an executive order, very powerful, on restoring the highest standards of air traffic controllers and others, by the way.
So DEI is dead, but also we have to do something to stop DEI. Basically, what I imagine this is just using a made-up culture war thing to polarize people in favor of cutting down on more government employees. They want to fire air traffic controllers. They want to fire pilots. They want to cut down on everything to do with the FAA and like all that. They don't want as many people or as much money going into the federal government. They want to downsize all of it. And so probably the best way to sell people on that idea is that we need to do mass firings because so many of these air traffic controllers and pilots were DEI hires that are not properly fit for their job. Mind you, up until today, I guess, flying in America has been the safest to fly, like the safest to fly in anywhere else. Like American Airlines, not specifically American Airlines, but like airlines in America, I should specify, are some of the safest there are. Like maybe the safest. Like this idea that there is this huge problem of DEI hire pilots and air traffic controllers causing a rash of crashes, it's just not a real thing. It's never been demonstrated. They're making shit up. They've done this thing for a while now where they've tried to make fail-son white people, for the most part, that haven't been able to do anything of value with their lives. They try to convince those people the reason why they didn't get accepted to their dream college or go down the list was because an underqualified brown person or a woman stole the position out from under them due to, back in the day they called it affirmative action, but now they call it DEI, due to DEI or affirmative action programs. Now, this has been a talking point for years and years and years and years. Like I said, the original talking point was affirmative action, but they really hit the nail on the head when they said DEI. Something I've found with the right wing is that so much of their talking points are meant to become memes, and so the ones that don't succeed are things like social justice warrior. That never caught on as much as SJW did, right? Like that term didn't catch on until SJW. Affirmative action didn't really catch on like it has today till they started calling it DEI. Political correctness didn't start to catch on as like an insult till they started calling it PC. I feel so much of the right's way of referring to the left is like hyper simplifying it for the sake of being able to deride the left through memes. And a lot of that involves just like making terms that we use into an acronym, right? Like, for example, do you know who started calling Black Lives Matter BLM? The right. And to this day, do you know who refuses to say Black Lives Matter rather than BLM when referring to the movement and or organization? Conservative, racist white people. Like, a lot of it is that, like, much of what the left is about, much of these phrases are objectively, like, hard to shit talk unless you essentialize it to, like, an acronym. Political correctness, who is it opposed to? Really think about those words. Political correctness. If you don't know what political correctness means, or no one has told you what it means, I should say, or what they want you to think it means, then you would assume it's a good thing to be politically correct. Like, the phrasing is like, you would kind of default on that probably. But the right heavily tries to polarize people against the concept of political correctness. But they don't call it that. They call it PC. They call it being PC or PC culture, you know? I don't know. I've just noticed this tendency. I know it's a bit of a tangent, a side tangent, but I think it was worth pointing out.
Then my administration will set the highest possible bar for aviation safety. We have to have our smartest people. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they speak, who they are. It matters intellect, talent, the word talent. You have to be talented.
See, like nothing that on the surface anyone who is a normie would disagree with. The president is telling you that there is a rash of employees working in the airline industry that are not qualified for the job and they need to be fired. In exchange, they need to hire people who are talented and qualified for the job. That is, in not so many bumbling words, what Trump said. And to most people, that sounds reasonable. Donald Trump and his entire crony party, his entire like movement are centered around telling people things that they want to hear, and telling them that the left is against that. And this is a good example of that. Because now if you are against Trump, you sound like you're against hiring people who are talented and qualified for the position.
Naturally talented geniuses. You can't have regular people doing that job. They won't be able to do it. But we'll restore faith in American air travel. I'll have more to say about that. I do want to point out that...
And before we find out Trump watches my streams, and when he heard me say, I have concerns about the safety of flying in America, he took it to heart.
Various articles that appeared prior to my entering office, and here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they...
You hear that, guys? Trump is cracking down on the legality of hiring people with disabilities. Just openly saying they're hiring people with disabilities? What the fuck? That needs to be made illegal. And to be clear, most Americans are not disabled. And even if they are, they don't consider themselves disabled in a lot of cases. And so to them, yeah, they do think people with disabilities should not be working jobs they consider important. He's appealing to the hateful majority.
They want them, they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so. This was in January 14th, so that was a week before I entered office. They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program.
It's so frustrating to explain to normies how you can read everything between the lines. Shit, half the craziest stuff he says openly. It's because they believe the sanity washing more than they believe you. When you try to convince normies that Trump is awful and they refuse to agree with that or believe it or take what you're saying seriously, it's because they're listening to other pundits, probably much larger, more successful ones, or like big figures or another person in their life who's like more authoritative, at least how they consider it, like maybe their father or something. They've heard something from them, from like a YouTuber, like a parent or something, and that sticks with them and is more valid to them than any argument you could make. And so when they listen to them sanity wash Trump, they believe it. Like, oh, Trump didn't really mean that, like, immigrants are all eating people's dogs and pets. He meant that, like, there were a couple of cases where people in Springfield, Ohio were concerned about pets going missing, and there's been a rash of claims that maybe the local immigrants have something to do with it. And it's like they sanity wash it. That's what they do. They sanity wash it. There's like a nonstop flow of sanity washing of everything Trump does to make it seem like anyone who is mad about Trump is just over exaggerating. They have Trump derangement syndrome. They're obsessed with politics. How many times have you seen people refer to those that are like, that shit talk Trump as obsessed with politics? Not like right-wing pundits. I mean just like regular normies who see someone like talking about how bad Trump is and they're like, oh God, politics. How often do you see that? I certainly see it a lot. Because the idea is to generally boil the frog of society to make it such that if you're someone concerned about Trump, what he wants to do, what he says, what he is doing, what power he has, you're just one of those crazy politics-obsessed weirdos who can't just, who's just mad their guy didn't win. They try to get the people who aren't super into politics to believe that Trump is just kind of chill. Maybe he's even, like, trying to fight for you. If all this media, if all the apparatuses, if all the establishment is so against him, maybe Trump really is fighting for you, right? That's the logic they use. Or at least the line, the road they build to make people walk down and arrive at that conclusion on their own.
Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine? These are people that are, I mean, actually, their lives are shortened because of the stress that they have. Brilliant people have to be in those positions, and their lives are actually shortened, very substantially shortened because of the stress.
I love how you can tell that Trump, like, watched some kind of documentary or like a factoid video at some point. Something I've noticed about Trump is he's like the kind of guy that you can always tell when he learned a new word. You know what I mean? You ever meet someone and like you can tell they learned a new word that day? Or you meet up with a friend, you can tell they learned a new word that day because they're using it, like, for the first time you've ever heard them use it, and they're using it frequently. Trump is a lot like that all the time, where you can always tell when Trump actually knows a little factoid on something. Have you ever noticed that? Like, usually he has no clue what he's talking about, and you can really tell. Like, a good example is when he said his favorite book in the world is the Bible, and they asked him to name his favorite quote, or verse. He couldn't, and so they ask him to name any verse, and he refuses to because he can't. And the way he talks, it's very clear he doesn't know anything. But when he does know something, like when he's heard some factoid or something, he's so quick to repeatedly emphasize, hey, did you know I know this thing? Did you know I know this thing? He really badly wants to seem smart. And this is a really good example of that. Like, he heard at some point, somewhere, that the stress that air traffic controllers experience literally reduces their lifespan and increases the chances of them developing certain things, or medical issues that could shorten their lives. He heard that once, thinks it's some niche little piece of info that he's special for knowing, and so he emphasizes that he knows it because he wants the American people to think he's smart. I can't be the only one who's picked up on how often he does it. Like, anytime we actually, like, stumble onto a topic where he knows something, where he actually knows something. He just has to repeat it over and over. Is that true? Look into it. I've noticed it. Keep an eye out for it, and maybe you'll notice it too.
Where you have many, many planes coming into one target, and you need a very special talent and a very special genius to be able to do it. Targeted disabilities are those disabilities that the federal government, as a matter of policy, has identified for special emphasis in recruitment and hiring. The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism, all qualify.
This is how we get to eugenics, guys. The fact is that, like, the majority of people's position in America on this is going to be positive. A lot of people think, what the fuck? People with issues of blindness, hearing issues, people who've lost limbs, and with paralysis, and I guess even dwarfism we're also considering now, like a disability on that tier, I guess, being short. Yeah, like, a lot of people, unfortunately, consider those being a thing disqualifiers from working at least certain jobs. This job in particular. I would not doubt that Trump's goal is probably to disallow the hiring of any of these groups for anything, period, for any job at all. However, most people are going to hear him say these are not jobs that this important job, this very life or death kind of job, is not one that people with disabilities should be allowed to do. A lot of people are going to hear that and think it's extremely reasonable. And that's how you boil the frog. You normalize the idea that maybe in certain areas, people with disabilities shouldn't be allowed to work. Yeah, that's reasonable. You know, we don't let people with disabilities work in these important industries. Why do we let them drive? You know, people could die. Yeah, you know, let's revoke their licenses. Yeah, that's reasonable. That's reasonable. Why should they be allowed to drive? Like why should people with disabilities be allowed to drive? Okay, yeah, sure. What about owning a house, you know? Like, there are a lot of people that, like, how can you, as a blind person, live at home and be safe? You know, we are citing the bill that are going to allow all these poor blind people to live in facilities we built for them. They won't have to live alone anymore. Like, you can just imagine, like, slowly but surely you boil the frog with this, like, common sense logic of, you don't want somebody with a disability in charge of doing this important thing that could affect you, right? And you get people on board with these progressively more severe restrictions in the rights of a group. And it's always in these small little baby steps. Zan, I'm literally blind. You're scaring me. Well, there are a lot of reasons to be scared of Trump's presidency. And yes, the popularization of eugenics adjacent rhetoric is one of them. Because that's how you get there. A society doesn't just become in favor of eugenics overnight. That's not how it works. You have to boil the fuck out of that frog. It's got to be a slow boil. And this is how that boil starts. With seemingly reasonable acts like this, where you say, no, we're not going to allow people with certain disabilities to, or I guess any disabilities, to work certain jobs. What happens when the certain jobs that people with disabilities are not allowed to work get to be a bigger list? You boil the frog, people. And eventually it won't be about jobs or anything like that. It'll be about whether or not people with disabilities that could possibly be inherited by a child should legally be allowed to reproduce, you know? Like, maybe we should, you know, think about that. Wouldn't that be unfair? You know, like, people, there will be a multi-billion-dollar industry of media centered around normalizing the idea of disallowing certain people from having children. And just saying, yeah, it's not that crazy, you know? Like, the radical left is all of a sudden in favor of people having kids? Come on, tell me you can't just imagine that future in your head right now. Like, I can see, like, the Matt Walsh video saying, so Donald Trump recently passed a very popular bill. Everyone's in favor of it. Anyone with a brain, after all. Banning people with severe disabilities who could pass it on to their children from having sex and reproducing. Now, the radical left are as you can imagine, very against this because they are in favor of babies being disabled. They're just evil. They're in favor of everything bad. You know, it's very funny that all of a sudden the left is in favor of people having babies. Now all of a sudden the left doesn't want to kill babies. It's crazy. Like, you can just imagine the Matt Walsh video, and he would say all that shit. All that shit is exactly what he would say. Like that, I can see the Matt Walsh video in my head. You have to remember, by the way, as things get worse, you have to remember there is still going to be a multi-billion-dollar conservative media empire dominating the entire media sphere. From Elon Musk owning Twitter to Fox News to all of the right-wing YouTube channels, Joe Rogan, all that shit. Joe Rogan and all those figures I just listed will all be working to sanity wash everything that happens over the next 4 years to the American people relentlessly. Like, Joe Rogan is fully on, like, part of Trump's campaign now.
Qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving
I'm at the max height for someone with dwarfism. I shouldn't really consider it a disability for me because I don't really need height in my day-to-day life. Yeah, the top end of dwarfism, though, in terms of height, is actually not that short. I think my grandma was actually like just like an inch and a half maybe above that line, and you know, like, she could live her life. She needed a stool to reach certain things, but she could live her life well enough. And I definitely grew past her by the time I was like 11. But she still, like, was, you wouldn't like look at her and be like, that's a really short person. You just be like, oh, she's pretty short. So yeah, the line for dwarfism, like the top of the line, is actually surprisingly tall. Like, you probably wouldn't even like think anything of it if you saw someone that tall like walk by you. But I will say, can I just say, dude, I am so glad that dwarfism has been settled on as the like politically correct term. How fucking cool is that? Dwarves. Yeah, that goes fucking hard, baby. Little person was some cucked shit, okay? I didn't like saying it. I avoided saying it. I avoided the whole time because I didn't like saying little person. It just felt degrading and weird and kind of like pussy shit. But dwarf. There's power there. Everyone loves dwarves. Like, in media, like the word dwarf evokes the concept of dwarves digging through the rock and stone and badass, like, digging up balrogs, and just everyone loves dwarves. It's just raw as shit. That's my PSA. I'm glad that's where everyone seems to have settled, because that goes hard as fuck.
FAA's mission of ensuring...
I'm a big fan of The Hobbit. I didn't like being called little person because people would just call me it all the time in school. Yeah, that shit. Like, little person just seems like... It's not even, like, no one... There's no effort there. Like, it's just like, okay, well... Fuck it, little person. like what? I don't know. We're not getting lost in this stun lock, but regardless, I'm just happy that we have dwarves.
Safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite. The FAA website shows that the agency's guidance on diversity hiring were last updated on March 23rd of 22. They wanted to make it even more so. And then
I genuinely cannot believe that there might be like a you must be this tall to work in the federal government like line because they're going to be blocking people with disabilities, including apparently dwarfism is included in the list as being able to work these federal jobs. What the fuck, man? Let's read the comments. Oh my god, he's blaming the crash on DEI, 4 years of blaming. Trump's first instinct is always to blame someone else, not solve issues. Did he seriously try to blame Obama for a plane crash 8 years after the man left office? Trump's administration fired a bunch of people from federal aviation positions, true, very shortly after taking office, so I find DEI to be unlikely behind this tragic accident. Sickening incompetence. Obama is always his go-to. This can't be real. He literally has no idea what he's talking about. He's just rambling nonsense, insane. So he's just going to blame the other guy for the next 4 years. And the blame game continues. It doesn't matter who dies or what happens as long as he looks good. I'm glad to see that the comments are pretty reasonable on this one. I'm surprised. Half the time we read the comments on like any news story like this, and they are just full of the most psychotic MAGA people you could imagine. Just real weirdos. Anyway, I'm glad to see the comment section is good, but very disappointed, though not surprised in the slightest, to see that Donald Trump is using a tragedy that resulted in the death of actual Americans, like the actual death of actual Americans, as like political fodder, like blatantly, like not even doing like the standard my heart goes out to the victim, to the families of the victims and those affected, like nothing like that. Just this was caused by DEI. Like he was so intent on getting in there and getting the message out, he forgot to look like he cares. And I think maybe some people picked up on that. Maybe some Trump supporters picked up on it. To be fair, my opinion of the average Trump supporter at this point is quite low. I don't know what could sway people who have gotten this bought in and are willing to defend what Trump does this far in, but I can only hope that there's been some level of general realization that this is not cool. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed this segment, God, my throat is all phlegmy right now. If you enjoyed this segment, if you found it entertaining, educational, or enjoyable, then please consider leaving a like and a comment, regardless of when you're watching, if it's live or after the fact. Likes and comments are the best way to support my channel in the algorithm. In fact, it helps my channel in real time. Every single like is like instantly a few recommendations of my content to new people, so it helps a ton. I really appreciate it. Subscribe and ring the bell icon to turn on all notifications if you haven't already, so that YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload new videos. And of course, if you want to see more from me on other platforms, follow my social medias, linked down below in the description. Finally, if you want to support me directly, help me keep the lights on and a roof above my head here at the Xander Hall studio, then please consider donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or support me through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, Patreon, or even buy some merch through the Streamlabs link down below in the description. Regardless of how you support me, though, thank you all so much for watching, as always, and have a good one.